What's up guys, my name is Josh, and today we're going to be talking about the Audeze LCD-2C. Now, this is my first pair of LCDs that I received, first pair that I've ever tried, first pair that I've ever heard, and I have to say, I'm pretty impressed. Now, before we get started, I do want to give a quick shout out to Josh with Honest Audio. He runs a YouTube channel called Honest Audio. He reviews headphones and audio topics, and if you want to check him out, he also sent out the KSC75s for me to review. So do me a favor, check him out, see if it's something that you're into, and subscribe if it is. So again, thank you Josh for sending these out, I appreciate it. All right. Let's go ahead and jump into the review, like always, starting with build. Now these come in a foamed up kind of padded cardboard box, and that's pretty much how they arrive. In an ideal world, I would have preferred at least a small, it doesn't have to be much, but a little bit of a carrying case, or at least a bag to kind of keep these in that isn't just a plain old cardboard box. The cardboard box is simple, but it seems safe enough, and it's definitely good enough to store these in or ship them in. Regarding the LCD series, a lot of them either have metal or wooden ear cups in terms of the circles, not really the grill. They're pretty much always metal. In fact, they're metal on here as well. But in the 2Cs, it is plastic, the actual ring that goes around the grill part that kind of holds everything together. Now it is important to note that it is incredibly solid feeling. Now this whole headphone does feel pretty solid. It's got a good amount of tension on the springs. The pads are absolutely wonderful and very, very plush. And the memory foam that they use in this is just incredible. Now, other than that plastic ring, pretty much everything else on this headphone is going to be metal. The ratchet mechanism for the extension piece is metal. The extension on themselves, the forks that hold on the cups are metal. The headband spring is metal. Now, both the headband strap and the pads do not feel like real leather. They feel like leather. That being said, they are incredibly comfortable. And I'm personally not a person who needs it to be real leather. I've had genuine leather that doesn't feel great and genuine leather that feels amazing, and I've had pleather that doesn't feel great and pleather that feels amazing. So if it feels amazing, which it does, to me, that's really all that matters. Now, a quick concern is that when you put these down on a desk like this, the headband strap actually does bend a little bit. And I'm not sure, I mean, on this particular headphone, it doesn't seem to be bent in any permanent way, but I don't know how long that would last without permanently having kind of a bend to it. Or worse, perhaps stretching where they connect to the actual headband structure. Now, in terms of longevity, I can't speak on that from personal experience, but it is a concern for me. Now, they may not amount to anything. Just because I'm concerned about it, it doesn't mean it's going to happen, but it is something that you may want to be aware of. Okay, so the overall comfort of this headphone is actually incredibly good considering how much these weigh, because these are a fairly heavy set of headphones. Definitely not the heaviest that Audeze makes, but they are fairly heavy. I do appreciate the new headband structure that they tend to be using compared to the old one. The old one is definitely really heavy on the very top of your head. This kind of spreads out the weight between the ear pads and the entire band. I can actually feel the pressure of the band all the way across the top of my head, so it's distributing the weight, at least to my head shape and size, very, very evenly. These have no problem staying on, and I don't really feel like they're gonna fall off. And to me, they feel incredibly comfortable, although I'm not very weight sensitive with a headphone. Heavy headphones like this don't bug me, they never have. But for a lot of you, for long listening sessions, it may be an issue. And it does come with a very nice braided cable. That's good length for a desktop and pretty much tangle free, and I don't really have any complaints. It terminates to a 1/4 inch and the standard right and left connectors that they use for the LCD series. Okay, now let's talk about the power requirements for this headphone. This headphone has an impedance level of 70 ohms and it has a sensitivity level of 101 decibels. So an amplifier is not absolutely required to run this. You can run this off of a phone, but I do recommend an amplifier, especially if you want to get the full experience that these can offer. Okay, now I want to talk about the sound of this headphone, and these are warm, rich, and extremely enjoyable headphones. They are so smooth and so nice to listen to, and just overall pleasant. And for like enjoyment or relaxing listening, I really like the way that these sound. They sound incredible to me. So the treble on this headphone, although very fast, is very laid back. It's very smooth, very soft delivery. But it also doesn't really feel lacking, because this isn't really a headphone that I would necessarily use for the absolute most critical type of listening. This is a headphone that I would use for, you know, sitting down, having a whiskey, just relaxing, sitting, kind of lounging type of headphone. And that's really, really what these headphones are good at, is just having a solid yet smooth delivery to them. A very warm, very enjoyable sound. I keep saying that word enjoyable, and I know it's gonna get a little bit annoying, but that's really what this headphone was to me. It was just pure enjoyment. It doesn't have a clinical sound like the LCD-X's do. It doesn't have a overly bright sound. It has a soft, yet attentive and energetic, but kind of just a warmer feel to it. It's very enjoyable. The mid-range is alive and forward and absolutely present, and it has this warm representation that's both thick yet clean simultaneously. It kind of just has this kind of soft blanket of sound that it wraps around you. And you can feel all the texture and the detail despite that blanket. It doesn't veil anything. Everything is presented clearly and efficiently, but it doesn't force anything on you. Now the vocals are heavily enjoyable. They are larger than life, I would say. The planar does a really great job of just feeling just absolutely massive. Now this goes from everything from, you know, wide sound staging, instruments way in the background, you know, orchestral music, and also vocals, things that are very intimate, just feel still intimate, but they feel huge. Now vocals kind of fall in the same line. They feel fast, they feel efficient, but they also have this air of smoothness, this kind of heavenly, angelic type of feeling to them. Now they can feel a tiny bit shouty, but I kind of want to explain this because I can't quite wrap my head around it. The only thing I can draw to comparison is going to be the HC600s here. So the HC600s are slightly shouty, just a little bit, just enough to almost add to the experience. And the LCD-2Cs do the exact same thing. Now the shoutiness to the vocals makes them seem particularly intense, and it makes them not just forward, not just fast sounding, and not just smooth sounding. It's everything all together. And it's not necessarily the delivery of the sound. We'll talk about that in a second. But it's how the sound is represented as a whole. And it has a slight boost to the vocals. And if you take a look at a frequency response graph, you can kind of tell where exactly that boost is. I'm not really going to bring that up though, because I think it's more about how it sounds. And on a headphone like this, I don't want to get super clinical about all the aspects of the highs and the lows and stuff like that. But this headphone gives vocals just a little more kick than they would normally have. So there's this thing called like an autonomous sensory meridian response. A lot of people know it as ASMR, and it's kind of like a weird YouTube thing where people like whisper to microphones. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about the response system. It's basically when you're like listening to something where you see something that's really epic and you get these like chills all over your body because it's kind of overloading your sensory response. And at a high enough volume with the right track, 600s and 2Cs can trigger that response on me. And no other headphone can really do that, to where voices just seem, the only way I can explain it is just larger than life. They have the recording, and this just gives it just a little bit of a boost. It's not sibilance, it's not being overly bright, and it's not being overly dramatic. And it doesn't feel like it's not necessarily being true to the vocalist, and it's just giving it a little bit extra there. And vocals on this are really enjoyable, and you know that makes me happy. Okay, the bass response is tight and strong, and on par with the best open backs I've heard that have good bass response, while not being overly dramatic or too much, and seems to be very even and on par with the rest of the ranges in this headphone, except for the treble. The treble, there's a little bit of a recession in the treble, and that's usually something that you do find with Audeze headphones, is they have varying treble degrees. And then in the bass response, they pretty much measure somewhat similar. But this headphone just has gigantic yet even bass. It doesn't seem overly emphasized by any measure, but it also is very present. And if you want to listen to explosions in the sky and you want to hear 30 hertz, you can hear 30 hertz with this, no problem. Now, imaging and soundstage, neither is necessarily class leading, I would say. I would say that for overall imaging and soundstage, 1990s do it better. They're a little bit wider and can be a little bit more narrow, and the imaging is a little bit more specific. 660s have much tighter imaging than these do, but these have a good representation of it. It's very even, it's very natural sounding, doesn't feel overemphasized or underemphasized, doesn't feel too narrow nor too wide, and it's kind of a good middle ground. It's got decent imaging for the price, it's got great imaging as a headphone as a whole, and there's other things that I've heard that do it better for the soundstage as well. But I also think it's important to point out that, like, I wouldn't look at a different headphone just because of the imaging and soundstage unless you really value that, because the overall delivery of this headphone is kind of not in a different class, so to speak, but it's just targeted towards different audiences than the 1990 and the 660 are. Now, I'll talk more on that in my conclusion in a second, but I kind of want to finish up the soundstage area because the vocals on this are very intimate. They're very close. They're not as close as X's or 600s, of course, or 660s, or even 1990s, but they are fairly intimate. And then you get this good separation in the background. And what I like is how they separate this delivery. So with bass notes and the lower end of mid-range, you get kind of this farther away sound. It sounds huge and just as is as present as ever, but it seems a little bit further away. And then as you get higher into the frequencies, the imaging of those vocalists and of instruments tends to narrow down a little bit. And for me, that kind of smooth honing in on being more and more tight the higher in frequency you go and not being sporadic about it, I think is really cool. And other headphones that I've tried that do it, let's just use 1990s for an example. They either seem like here or here. And there's a little bit in between, but it's not as smooth and progressive as a 2C is, and it's a lot more quick. It's like, oh, you're really close or you're really far away. Really close, really far away. This is kind of it can really fall anywhere in there, so that's why it feels a little bit more natural, I would say, than the 1990s do. Although from a technicality standpoint, I would say that the 1990s do both a little bit tighter and a little bit better. And despite them not having the tightest imaging or the widest soundstage, these sound gigantic, just absolutely enormous. Bigger than the 1990s for sure, obviously bigger than the 660s, and just incredibly vast sounding. And Fighting the Orkai, which is a classic testing song that I use, is just incredibly far away and just has this incredible far away yet vast sound to it. And it's kind of hard to explain, but I would say it kind of sounds like it's far away, but it's not. Like you're hearing sounds that are far away, but they're close. It's like having an orchestra, but you're like right up in it. It's very intense without sounding necessarily overly intimate. I'm hoping that makes sense. Maybe not, but that makes sense to me. Okay, so the conclusion, 10 out of 10 for me. Personally, for enjoyment purposes, I'm not gonna use these for analyzing music. I'm not gonna use these for studio use, but these are absolutely enjoyable. They are warm, wide, and wonderful. They are just absolutely stellar in my opinion. Now, real quick, I do want to talk about price point because I think originally these started out as $599. $600 was like the introductory price, and then they bumped it up to I think $799. Now they're $799, which isn't bad. Now, obviously, I would like to see it at $599. That would be preferential for me, or maybe they were $699. Anyways, they were a little bit cheaper than they are right now. Obviously, I would like to see it at that price. Even at $800, I think that they're kind of worth buying in my opinion. However, and this is kind of where the comparisons come about, I wouldn't necessarily call them class leading. I think that depending on what you're going for, they attain different goals. And if you're going to look for a specific goal, there might be a better suited headphone. So let's talk about a few of them. Okay, so 1990s are just purely more analytical, they're clearer, they're more resolving. They have a much greater overall ability to analyze the sound, and they make analyzing music very, very easy, whereas analyzing music with this headphone could be a bit of a struggle comparatively. It's still very easy, but if you were to compare the two, 1990s clearly beat it. If you're mixing music, both the 660s and the 1990s would do it better because they have kind of a more complete range, because the treble on this is fairly recessed. And because that treble recession, 10 to 20K does not nearly take the precedence that I really think it should have. Now, a headphone that does have a similar performance in terms of the mid-range and low range, although different delivery, but it does have that treble range, is the LCD-X here. Now, the LCD-X classic headband, don't like it as much, but I will have an LCD-X review, and I'm thinking, because I'm also getting the LCD-3s probably today actually, that I might do sort of a brand roundup with the 2Cs, the X's, and the 3s, because I don't want to make a bunch of comparisons between the two, because I think that would just be overkill. Now, even though I get a lot of views from that, I still think it'd be just a little too much, in my opinion though. But if you really want to see that, and lots of people want to see that, I'd love to have comparisons between the X's, the 2Cs, the X's, the 3s, all that sort of stuff. But I think a brand roundup would kind of be better. Anyways, the upper end of the ranges are a little bit lacking to a point where I would say that you're missing a little bit too much to really have a deep understanding of an entire song. Now, if you're just listening for enjoyment and you don't want fatigue, you want something that's comfortable, easy, relaxing, and overall kind of a warmer, kind of smoother experience, then I would definitely go with the 2Cs. Okay, so that's gonna wrap it up. I hope you like this review. Follow me on my social media. There's also Patreon if you support what I do, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Thank you very much for watching. Peace.